Hello, this is Lama Rigze, your friend, and I'm wearing my my monk style undergarment. So I have to make sure you get that. If you wear Zen and wear a shoulderless shirt, Tibetan tradition dictates that you fold your Zen over your shoulder, because I guess in certain cultures in the East, showing your shoulders is sort of alluring, and I think, ironically, the way that a man's brain works is, just anything that's sort of circular, spherical is interesting, fascinating for some reason. So they took note of that and decided that men should cover up their shoulders. So, and women, to each their own. But it's more of a little tip if you're getting really deep into things. Make sure you wear your Zen in a way where you can fold the non-hanging side, the opposite side of the hanging part. You want the back edge to fold over the shoulder if you're wearing shirtless top. So you made it this far, so now I'll get to the point. What's so hard about us recognizing our true nature? Why is that difficult? And I'm talking from Ati Dzogchen point of view primarily, but really all of this stuff is covered in the Pranjana Paramita, most especially just the notion of the four extremes. And I guess that's really where to start, is understanding the four extreme views. So it's if you're looking to identify something transcendent of concept, then you want it to be undefinable, and the four extreme views are what makes them essentially define the undefinable by saying you can't say it exists, you can't say it doesn't exist, you can't say that it neither exists nor doesn't exist, and you can't say that it both exists and doesn't exist, right? So it's not nihilistic, it's not a paradox, it's not existent, and it's not non-existent, and what that does is essentially it leaves you in meditation with this imperative to drop any sort of intellectual observation or need to define experience. And if you don't do that, then you can't escape those four extreme views, because you'll always just have the intellect working in the background going, oh, it's this, or oh, it's like that, or oh, it's not that, or oh, it transcends everything. The intellect will keep working to nail it down, and essentially it's Rigpa is a perfectly living entity, a pure presence of life in its most essential form. And like all life, it sort of disdains to be defined, nailed down, walled in, controlled. It wants to be free to do as it wishes to do. And so at the Ati level, unlike almost any other level in Dharma, right, whether especially in the Vajrayana tradition of Maha and Anu, which are very much engaged, like the Yang Shen, to use Taoist terminology, like that fiery mind, like this kind of like a way of saying Yang Shen, right? This very like kind of blazing intellect, this very like incredible ability to, with poise, hold extraordinary amounts of information stably, right? Which is an incredible feat of shamatha. And that's like where a lot of people lose that aspect of Mahayoga, that it is like completely reliant on shamatha, or quiescence of mind, right? You have to be able to visualize something and then completely settle with that. So in order to use most of the mechanisms of kind of the magic of Mahayoga. And with Anu Yoga, you're kind of really pushing the extremes of like your central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, your blood and lymph and air, breath, what they say is wind, but then like breath control. And they very intelligently link control of the breath to control of the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems, at like the autonomic nervous system, so they gain control over things that science says you're not supposed to have control over. And this is like an incredible feat of control. And then you get to Ati, and any attempt to control will fail. Well, it's an immediate F, right? Because you're not allowed to nail anything down. You're not allowed to control it, because in order to control it, you have to nail it down. You have to like, draw a circle around it and be like, this is it. And you have to understand all its parts and mechanisms. And there's some of that comes naturally through like relaxing into the experience. You start to like be able to identify, and this is important later on, like the difference between Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya aspects of transcendent reality. But really we're talking about initially getting used to the Dharmakaya. And so we have these four extreme views, it exists, it doesn't exist, it neither exists nor doesn't exist, it both exists and does not exist. And they say to identify Pranjana, to identify Rigpa, and people argue these are two different things. They're really not. And that's not according to me, that's according to Padmasambhava. It's actually written in some of his texts. He was very explicit. He's actually explicit about... sorry, my hands are shaking a little too much. He's actually very explicit about, the entirety of the path and whatever, like wisdom, vipassana and whatnot, being essentially synonyms. We're all talking about the same thing. It makes that clear specifically. And I can reference that text if anybody wants it. But more importantly, it's like, okay, so you have to understand we can't be occupying any one of those four extreme views. They're called the four extreme views not because they're like extreme or going too far, but really like it's almost like a tongue-in-cheek warning of like you're going too far. Like even to settle on a paradox of well, it exists but it doesn't exist, they're like, oh, that's too extreme. That's too intense a reification of the reality of the thing, right? And what they mean by extreme is it's too much engagement of concept, too much engagement of the intellectual thinking, defining, not discriminating mind, judgmental mind. And so that you have to understand up front. I think that gets skipped. People try and like go directly to pointing out without saying like, hey, before we point this out to you, you need to know what failure looks like. And that's what failure looks like, is to settle on any one of those 4 points and say like, yeah, that's it. Or to essentially at any point say, yeah, that's it, in the style of definition. There is a yeah, that's it in the style of experiential mudra or posture, essentially like the mind is allowed to, or awareness is allowed to sort of take its own seat, and that's a posture of your mental capacity or your capacity for cognition. And I don't think I can go any deeper than that because it is so deeply personal and experiential. And that's another part of the problem. It's deeply personal. It's something you have to know for yourself. And as long as you have the proper scriptural foundation, like if you've received, the transmission of like the 4 extreme views, the transmission of the short Prajnaparamita prayer, the transmission of, one of the many pointing out texts, whether it's from Long Chimpa or Padmasambhava or Saraha or, Dujum Lingpa, Dujum Rinpoche, it doesn't really matter. Pema Lingpa, whatever like suits you. So what's the deal? Even if we have these 4 extreme, explain these 4 extreme views, still you won't necessarily be able to do anything with that. And the reason is that the seeking mind, the mind that looks inward at awareness itself, and that's the most initial practice. I would bet it's even the most initial practice in Mahamudra, depending on how the tradition is formed. They might put a lot more emphasis on Uttara Tantra than Dzogchen does. But the most initial practice is to find the mind, to find the awareness. And the notion is that you kind of like end up like chasing your tail because, like I said, awareness is very much a living, reactive thing, and so anytime you feel like you found it, it seems to squirm and move and, change positions or change directions, and that's meant to sort of exhaust you and, thoroughly sort of dry you out, kind of like make you wary of really like trying to do that. And that's very important, and that's actually, I think, where like the disconnect comes of like, why is this so hard? Because it's not hard. You like really like if you have someone who knows how to put it in the right terms, and you've already built the requisite merit and wisdom, and you have like proper devotion, like it should be like very simple. Either if the Lama has some skillfulness or, a powerful enough presence, it should be easy enough. So, the issue is the seeking mind, in that the seeking mind is a perpetual circle. It's a perpetual loop of finding and then being unsure, and then looking and finding and being unsure, and looking and finding and being unsure. And what's happening is that the ego is being allowed to be involved in this process. And Rigpa is actually meant to completely replace the ego as the center of your existence. So the self, which seeks Rigpa, when it has found its own awareness, its own self nature, is meant to be completely relinquished for what is found. So Ramana Maharishi says this perfectly, I think, and like I have to credit him as the one who said it, even though it's out of our tradition, and people don't like it, but I had never seen a Buddhist say this. I've had Lamas agree with me when I pointed it out, but I've never seen a scripture that puts it this way, and this it is and was the most defining and strong statement I ever heard on the subject, and that was when one finds, he uses the term the self, and Pamasambhava also actually says, yes, this is the same thing, and when he's doing his pointing out instruction. He says, when you find the self, you can't, one can't know it, one can only be it. And if you need I'm certain I could probably find like 1,000 different like good examples from Longchenpa, but the third Karmapa's treatise on Mahamudra, he says even the Buddhas have not seen it. So it's like, so what have they done if they haven't seen it? And it's like, the answer is that they've simply allowed it to be. Awareness is found, and it's essentially given the reins. One gives oneself up to it completely, and allows awareness to be aware in the most free, expansive, and unimpeded way possible. And then, one tries to avoid what in the Mahamudra, I believe it's the Mahamudra tradition, and I don't know the Tibetan word, I could never find it. One is meant to avoid what they call like the underchanging state, and it's just more like easier way to say it is like not to fall under the subtle unconsciousness of like a trance-like presence. And really what that is that the ego is sort of like snuck in the back door and is sort of like is freely identifying itself with awareness and being like, oh yes, I am the Rigpa. And that essentially then takes the first of the four extremes of, or the second, I can't remember which one, but it says then, well, it exists, because I am it, so it exists. So there's your error. And so the self is not allowed to participate. The judgmental, intellectual, defining, conceptual mind is not allowed to participate. Rigid self-control is not allowed to participate, and even one's concentration is not allowed to participate. So Rigpa stands on its own without any input, help, or assistance from us. And this is where the surrender and devotion of Maha-yoga, especially in the form of Guru Yoga, and it's why the Dzogpa Chenpos in particular emphasize Guru Yoga so intensely, is because it teaches one how to give oneself up to something greater, which is the limiting factor of one's power of Cheche, or just the ability to allow Rigpa, or unalloyed, primordially pure awareness, to do its job. And so what ends up happening is that the more one gives oneself up to this pure present awareness, what Eckhart Tolle calls the now, because it is this present awareness. It isn't the awareness of the future or the past. It is like what is in this moment. It is first person singular. But that first person singular is not you. It is before you, and it is before all of existence. It is what was before the Sambhogya Kaya existed. So even like before wisdom or luminosity, there is Rigpa, there is Dharmakaya, right? it is before space, before time, before awareness. And I'm saying this in this particular way, and I know that this will be like a stumbling point for people because we're talking about awareness. But it's the tree that falls in the forest, we're going to hear it, right? It's like if there's awareness without luminosity, then awareness does not function as we know awareness to be, because it has nothing to perceive, right? It's not emitting Maya is not present, right? The illusory, vivid experience of the radiance, it does not exist in pure Dharmakaya. And so it is like before it escapes the four extremes. So we can't even say that it is before existence, right? But it is before existence. It is before you were anything at all. And it is your source. It is what allows you and everything else to be. And it doesn't have an ego. And it's perfectly harmonious, which means it's beautiful. And anything that is beautiful is healing. And anything that is healing is virtuous. So it is primordially pure, primordially virtuous, and it is perfect knowing. And so it is the full-blown, already established, perfect accumulation of all the causes and conditions of Buddhahood. And it is primordially virtuous and primordially wise. And it is the perfect accumulation of relative and ultimate bodhicitta, or wisdom and merit. And so, because it is all that, it merely needs to be put at the head of the table and allowed to sit for long enough where we become habituated to allowing it to be what is, without any caveats. And when we allow it to be what is without any caveats, that dehabituates us from being a conceptual elaboration of Nirmanakaya or an ignorant being, and reestablishes us in the primordially transcendent. And this is just a function of the source of relative and ultimate bodhicitta multiplied by time and our ability to surrender. The more we surrender and the longer we sit, the more that this true nature, this source of the full completion of relative and ultimate bodhicitta of all conditions of Buddhahood is allowed to blossom. So in the word Buddhahood, you have Sangye, right? So right now we're talking about Sang, right, which is like Actually, I don't know the Sanskrit, so I might be saying this backwards. Anyways, it translates to awakening and blossoming. And right now we're talking about awakening, right? Which is that moment of recognition, right? So that's, you've woken up, right? You might still be dreaming, right? You might be essentially in a lucid dream, and you're, oh, I'm asleep, right? But that's a type of awakening, right? It's like the restoration of awareness, and then maybe like you start to open your eyes a little bit, and then also if you keep at trying to wake up, or allowing yourself to wake up, and you don't try and go back to bed, eventually you're fully conscious, and there you are, awake. The next part is the fullness of relative and ultimate bodhicitta, like, which is like the elaboration of all siddhis, right? All like magical powers, all miraculous abilities, and the complete enjoyment of reality, or primordial bliss, which is dharma dhatu, right? Which is like actually also a synonym for dharmakaya. So all of that just comes from sitting, and you just sit without being a participant in your own experience, while remaining perfectly aware. Like everything in Buddhism, it's a paradox, right? It's like you essentially have to mind your awareness without minding your awareness. And that's done by allowing yourself to be the awareness without worrying about whether you can see the awareness. And the pitfall is that being awareness may become a spiritual ego, right? A self-existence of its own, and any self-existence is subject to threat, subject to annihilation, subject to hope and fear, and that is ignorance, and hope and fear are the ups and downs of samsara, which is like the very definition of suffering according to Buddhism. So you're giving up on being anything. And that sounds horrible. That probably sounds terrifying, until you realize that this is the most beauteous, healing, virtuous, awe-inspiring, transcendent, incredibly gratifying, and deeply moving experience that can be had. And one only knows that by entering into it. But also this saves me the trouble. I might make a separate video reiterating this, but it does save me the trouble of explaining one thing, which I find very weird. And I think it has to do with the process I was describing, of like essentially that once you get this, you can relax, and everything will come together. But so much in Dharmic circles, they talk about realizing the nature of mind being synonymous with Buddhahood, and it's absolutely not. You can realize the nature of mind. Most people that have realized the nature of mind are still totally samsaric beings, living, wisdom lives because they're hooked up to wisdom, but, they're like prone to the ups and downs of life, probably more so than normal people, because the incredible sensitivity that you have when you realize how life is meant to function, which is like beauteous and harmonious and without any sort of drama and without any sort of conflict, that everything can just be easy. That actually, whatever ego remains that is wandering around trying to stabilize awareness, and this really applies to modern Western practitioners, because we still have to live our lives, we still have to go to jobs, we still have to, make money and worry about things, unfortunately. And we just, if you have the karma to like totally move into retreat for the next 10 years and sit with awareness, I absolutely rejoice in that, but I am suspicious, because I think if you had the karma, you wouldn't be watching this video, you'd be gone. A lot of people talk about I'm gonna live in a cabin in the woods someday, and it's like, the people that end up doing that are already busy making that happen. They're absolutely dedicated to making that happen. If you're still living your ordinary life and, in an apartment complex, or, paying a mortgage or something like that, dreaming of the day you're gonna escape, it's like, you're just a different creature, you're a Westerner. And it's just a matter of discovering Western Dharma. And you essentially turn life into a retreat, and it's sort of a bit of a fever dream, because you're experiencing the transcendent, but you're also dealing with a great deal of affliction. There's a certain amount of hellishness in being made aware of heaven and being forced to live on earth. And so recognizing the nature of mind is the beginning of the journey of this particular part of the path. It is not very, very, very few people recognize the nature of mind and fully stabilize it in a single breath. Usually, as I said, it's a procession of time and energy, and it takes work, dedication, devotion. And you can certainly recognize it and then perhaps not completely lose it, but really get kind of far away from it, and you can die an ordinary being sorry to tell you, you can die an ordinary being having recognized the most profound truth. It isn't enough to just see it. You have to habituate it. You have to completely give yourself up to it. And that, like most of the Vajrayana, is an effect of devotion, discipline, surrender, and time. And so with, those four aspects, and then like tertiary conditions, environment and whatnot. But devotion, discipline, surrender, and time, you slowly blossom these two bodhicittas, of ultimate and relative merit and wisdom. So you are aware of the totally, fully manifested, perfect accumulation of all causes and conditions of Buddhahood, and you can reach out, and graze it, but you haven't really fully grasped it, and you haven't, really swallowed the medicine yet. You haven't really taken it in, and it will take time, because there are obstacles in your way. There are fears you have, and grudges. That's the biggest part. That's the biggest part of the path at that point, that moment of achieving wisdom, is all of the blame and all of the shame. Those are the two, all your trauma. If you blame yourself, it's shame. If you blame someone else, it becomes resentment. It becomes a grudge, and both have to be totally forgiven, right? And that is purification, which means healing through forgiveness and relinquishment. So this is a lot of people think that it's not true, that forgiving is forgetting, but it's absolutely true. You completely forget it even happened, because if you're preserving the memory, that means there's karma there. There's emotional weight that's keeping it alive in your mind. The mind doesn't hold anything it doesn't feel is essential, and that's why we don't remember most of what we experience, is because your mind is just chucking things out, saying this is inconsequential, and you're partitioning trauma in order to not go in order to not fall prey to psychosis or mental illness. So that's it. I really have given you everything you need. I'm not sure if you caught it. I'm not sure if I would have caught it. But really, that's it, Get rid of the conceptual mind. Get rid of the need to control. Another way of saying that is to, bring surrender into a somewhat powerful faculty. Make surrender a somewhat powerful faculty through practicing surrender, which is most easily done through devotion and Maha Yoga, in Guru Yoga especially, because you're just, when you trust that something is absolutely perfectly loving, wise, kind, and has your best interests at heart, then it's easy to let go and trust that as long as you're sitting with this thing, that everything is going to be just beautiful. And that habituates you to surrender. So Guru Yoga is a very powerful conditional aspect of realizing Dharmakaya because of the depth of devotion. And Guru Yoga doesn't necessarily mean like Pamasambhava or Gambopa or, it can be Yeshitsogya, it can be Longchenpa, it can be like any master that holds the realization that you're after. So even like it may be even possible to, take like a Tara practice as Guru Yoga if you feel like Tara is your Guru, You'd be a rarer individual, but it's not out of the question. And perhaps if you're female, that might, satisfy some, allow you to evade some karmic obstacles you have trusting the opposite sex. And, that could be vice versa for men as well. If like trusting men is hard, then perhaps like a Dakini or a wisdom goddess is, a deeper, like perhaps Yoshe Tsogyal is a better choice. Whatever it is, it's just more like having a singular deity that you trust to be the absolute source of Dharma and the absolute source of the two bodhicittas, right? Of like all virtue and all wisdom, and that it has your best interests at heart, and that praying to it is transforming you and bringing you closer to everything that is, unconditionally virtuous, unconditionally loving, and that, your enjoyment of that activity of being in the presence of a being that loves you unconditionally, wants everything to work for you in the greatest ways possible, and, the development of that is its own process, but I'll just say that it's, really has to do with how big how big you can make those feelings, how big you can make that being in your life in terms of its power to change you, your circumstances, your mindset and the like. So you have this surrender, and then you have the discipline to sit for, 4 or 5, 6 hours, and then you have already some experience with searching for awareness, and you've seen the emptiness of awareness, because that is not the recognition of your mind, that is seeing the emptiness of awareness. It's just like recognizing emptiness as the essence of awareness. It's not. It's kind of like a precursor. But when you've seen that, you essentially know that awareness has no descriptors. And it has no karma. It has no concepts of its own. It's free of, it's completely uninhibited, right? Which is kind of like where the whole notion of Dakini comes from, is, or Kandro, like a sky dancer, right? Is some and why they're portrayed, why certain deities are portrayed as being like totally naked. It's this uninhibited nature, there's nothing like restraining these energies. There's nothing restraining awareness, because because it has no definition. It abides through, with, and as everything, and so it's all encompassing. So you have to see this sort of emptiness as a precursor. So you have this empty awareness, and then you allow it to come into the forefront of your being, and you allow yourself to take a back seat to the point where you slowly dissolve into pure presence. And there's no more thought of what is or what isn't. There's no, and there's just the pure enjoyment of the activity of being aware and in the moment. And then, of course, that enjoyment is a danger and an obstacle in and of itself, because that, is a source of attachment. But it's sort of fine if that's like the worst negative karma that you can come up with is your attachment to the bliss of Rigpa. Then it's you get all sorts of warnings in these Dzogchen texts about that. But really, like, if that's the worst that you're doing in your life, you're better than I am. But that's it. You don't try and know it. You don't examine it. You don't think about it. One cannot see it. One can only be it. Even according to the third Karmapa's treatise on Mahamudra, even the Buddhas have not seen it. And, according to Ramana Maharishi and Dudjom Rinpoche, if you can't manage this part, if that's too much, then just simply like sitting with the presence of yourself and being aware of yourself in your self nature, the feeling of being here. You can sit with that and habituate being with that, and that will help your mind stabilize so that in the future you can sit with the fully manifested thing. And that is essentially the discipline element of just sitting with it. That's the discipline element. The surrender element is taking a back seat. So I say discipline, surrender, devotion, discipline, surrender, time, right? So the devotion aspect is just admiring the qualities of the experience, like seeing just how healing, beautiful, and virtuous it is. And that is devotion. Devotion is like the intertwining experience of gratitude and awe, which can be described as being moved, feeling moved or feeling inspired. And when that feeling of being moved and being inspired draws you into the practice, when that makes you want to do the practice more, that's devotion. You're now devoted to the practice because it is becoming something that you feel love for and loyalty towards because of how grateful and how amazing you see it to be. You know, how grateful to it you are, how amazing you see it to be. Driving your practice, that's devotion. And then lastly is time, and I can't believe this video has gone on this long, but I guess it's kind of a deep topic, so I'll forgive myself. Bless you. Time is basically the body. It's basically biology. And it's the real limiting factor. And it's actually like one of the reasons that they place Anu Yoga ahead and Maha Yoga ahead of Ati Yoga, even though really usually in a serious practice scenario they would be introducing you to this first, and that actually allows Maha and Anu to be at their full power. But Anu Yoga being the sort of like achievement of the perfection of the body and the pliant, like physical pliancy, being a huge part of Anu Yoga, and mental pliancy being a huge part of Maha Yoga. Having all the aspects of the nerve, lymph, blood, and breath deeply enriched, healthy, and flexible makes time move faster in our practice, because time in the sense of development is actually the ability for the brain and the various systems to match the new blueprint that we've generated. So it's actually quite easy for you to, through your mind, to generate yourself as the deity. It's very difficult for the body to generate itself as the deity. So that's the time aspect, is just that your body is going to kind of be dragged kicking and screaming through this entire experience. And that's probably the last thing I'll say. I'll say two more things so I can end on a positive note. But I want to say that it's not to say that this isn't like the blissful path. It is, because it like harnesses devotion, which is like awe, it is bliss, it is wonder, and Anu Yoga is like the complete unlocking of the nervous system to where it is just feeding your joy. in levels that are totally super physiological. But especially if you read Yeshe Tsogyal's biography and you get to the point at which she's actually getting to the real depth of practice, and she's not just kind of like moving through Ana Yoga in the old way, the kind of dangerous way, that you really need incredible karma for and an incredible teacher to pull off. I'll say that. And, just an incredible discipline as well. Incredible everything. But anyways, there's just a tremendous amount of rebellion that the body gives you. And that your life will kick up for you. The amount of pain and suffering and the amount of active forgiveness, which is sometimes called patience, but that's what it is. It's forgiving actively. Forgiving what is happening in the moment is patience. Patience and endurance are not the same thing. Patience and forbearance are not the same thing. Forbearance and endurance can give patience space to accomplish its goal, right? You can give you enough space and time to let things go and forgive and not react. But forgiveness is actually the true mechanism of patience, right? And so in all of these yogas, you are purifying karma, and the ego does not like this idea because it completely relies, like any good story, the only reason that this story is meaningful is because of the conflict. And as you go after the conflicts within yourself and within your exterior life, you will bring down the wrath of the ego in every form imaginable. And the symptom, the random symptoms of health, the random occurrences of just incredible interpersonal difficulty, the random occurrences of hyper emotional moments and feeling like you're close to mental breakdown or mental illness, or the incredible shame, anger, frustration, resentment, like all these things are going to get kicked up, and the ego is going to bring these things to the forefront because it's trying to bring you back into the fold of living your life in the style of being the hero of your life, triumphing over evil and lauding the good. And essentially that means taking the sides, which means you're somebody's villain. And if you're winning, it means somebody's losing. And that's why bodhisattvas are not winners in society. That's why saints are not necessarily the great success stories of life, because they're oftentimes they're offering the victory. Sometimes they're offering their bodies, their they're offering their, their wealth, their, Shanideva says, give everything but the 3 rubs of religion, So it's not necessarily a formula for success. We shouldn't be adverse to success, and I think as Western practitioners, engaging in success, resourcefulness, entrepreneurship as part of the path is absolutely necessary, because we must learn how to thrive as a society of practitioners. And anyone, generally in the West, anyone that is devoted to give money to practitioners are likely practitioners themselves. And if you're a practitioner in the West, you're likely very devoted. You're likely somebody who actually wishes to achieve enlightenment. And this isn't the case in the East. There are like donors who wish to pursue the joys of samsara, and they're just sort of hedging their bets by giving to the monks or giving to the lamas, building temples and stupas and shrines. They're sort of like, well, I'll just be a samsaric hedonist, but if I sponsor this person in retreat, then essentially my karma is their karma. And so if they succeed and they achieve enlightenment, essentially it's as if I have achieved enlightenment myself, because of the nature of interdependence. Those sort of beings don't really exist in the West. What we have is a really grand community of practitioners. We have very, very few actual donors that aren't wishing to go into retreat themselves or wishing to accomplish themselves. And that's very dangerous, because it's like you're taking away from your own resources to accomplish, to give to somebody else, in the hopes that you'll generate the causes and conditions to accomplish. But one of the causes and conditions to accomplish are the resources, the wealth to be free of the cares, to need to work and need to preserve oneself. So you either engage in work as a aspect of the path, or you get an incredible donor. And I think that the incredible donors are a rarity in the West. Anyways, if you made it this far, I've really tried my best to spill the beans and give you the best possible advice that I can give you. And it probably has not sounded like very much, because there really isn't a whole lot to it. And you could probably do it in an afternoon if you really tried. And maybe that doesn't sound authentic or real or possible because of the false equivalency of realizing the nature of mind with Buddhahood. And it's not. It's merely the awakening of the faculty of your ordinary mind. Right now, you have, if you haven't recognized the nature of mind, you have an elaborated mind. You don't have an ordinary mind. You have a mind that's complicated and has all these complicated narrative structures. But just getting back to plain old ordinary mind, plain old ordinary existence, is ordinary and simple and basic and elementary. It's nothing complicated. But if you can't let go, if you can't surrender, if you don't truly desire to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, if you're absent of bodhicitta, if you're absent of insight into emptiness, if you're like missing certain qualities, it becomes impossible. But that really all gets ironed out with just some like study of scripture and guru yoga. Like if you do your nundro and you study the scripture, especially as your inner light starts to kindle, then the scripture starts being an affirmation of your experience, and that eggs you onward, and that gives you faith in the path, and that's how you develop faith. Faith turns into devotion, and devotion eventually culminates in surrender, of being able to, or I guess another way of saying surrender is moral certitude, of being able to relinquish all of the causes of negative karma that you've been attached to for lifetimes and lifetimes, and renunciation, to even like be able to let go of yourself, because you trust that you're letting go of yourself. You're letting go of the cliff's edge, because you know that you're going to be caught. You're not going to fall into some perilous abyss. You're falling into the beauteous, luminescent, perfectly virtuous, unconditionally loving lake of Dharmadhatu, the very nectar of the Guru's heart. And you're falling into the hands of the Guru, and so you don't have to be scared. And this essentially is what defeats the fear. Once you know that you're truly held dear by, and I'll dare to say, by God himself, that, the Guru Rinpoche loves you so much, he can't love you more, and he can't love you less. That he loves you so intensely that he would never let you go through anything that wasn't going to help you. And that the more that you surrender to him, the better and more beautiful and more blissful and easier your life is going to become. That in and of itself, that feeling of letting go into the unconditional love of the Guru, is so close to the actual recognition of the nature of mind. It's really no wonder that Guru Yoga is like the top recommendation of most Lamas when it comes to how to recognize. But know that if you recognize it, if you find this thing and you surrender to it and you allow the true realization of that experience to be had by getting out of your own way, by letting go of the need to be anything, and allowing ordinary awareness to take the fore, to take the reins, to be everything, to totally envelop and consume all of your precious narratives, all of your ideas about reality, and just allow that beauty and healing and perfection to take root in your life is the most wonderful, blissful, incredible gift you could ever give yourself. So, there. That was an extra 15 minutes I think I took to kind of even out the two sides of the coin. This is the hardest thing the path to enlightenment is the absolute hardest, most painful, most difficult thing you'll ever decide to do. It's also the most beauteous, healing, loving, virtuous, excellent, awe-inspiring, gratitude-inspiring thing that you could ever have in your life. And it really is the only game in town. It really is the only thing worth having or doing. And so I highly encourage you to develop it and find it. It's very, very much worth the time of a few hours of one evening or afternoon to sit and allow awakening to move into blossoming, and allow it to blossom enough so that the bud of Buddhahood does not close when you get up off of the meditation cushion. And from then on, if your experience has been authentic, I have no doubt that you will truly be devoted to the practice. If the primordial virtue, the bliss of infinite merit, infinite goodness arises as the luminosity of empty awareness, that'll keep you going. Keeps me going. I'm actually feeling a little better these days, but people told people many times, my health has not been good. It's been what most people would consider horrifying or terrifying. But I'm very happy. And I've explained to you now why I am very happy. And I'm explaining to you now why I love you all so much. I wish you every happiness in the world. May you find everything that you were seeking in the most divine, excellent, and ideal way, going beyond anything you ever knew to ask for. Dashidale.